The word psychic has been used as a blanket label for a number of different cognitive processes, different ways information can appear in the mind. When we collapse all of these processes into one word, two things happen. People who experience unusual perception tend to exaggerate what's happening to them, and everyone else just dismisses it completely. And both reactions are made by the same mistake. We don't habitually separate the different types of cognitive perception. So today I want to talk about something much more precise. Different forms of cognitive perception and the channels through which information can be received. So if you've ever had the feeling where you might have some sort of intuition or cognitive ability, stay with me through this episode. Most people don't have one ability, they have one dominant channel of perception, and they just haven't learned to recognize it yet. The first category is what we could call perceptual channels. This is when information arrives through sensory-like perception, usually visual or auditory. Historically, these experiences have been called clairvoyance, that's visual perception, or clairaudience, that's hearing information internally, and in modern research contexts, what's called remote viewing. What's important to understand is that these perceptions don't always appear the same way. Sometimes they show up as subtle impressions, brief flashes of imagery, or internal sounds that are easy to overlook. But other times they can appear much more vividly. Some people experience short scenes that play almost like a segment of reality in the mind. And it's not a daydream, it's not something that they feel like they are actively imagining. It's more like something arrives fully formed. And in some cases, the same scene may reappear over time with different details added in that weren't visible before. People explain these as unfolding in layers. Another way perceptual channels show up is through spatial awareness. Someone might suddenly know where something is located, or the direction where something is coming from, or where attention should be focused, without consciously reasoning it out. So the key thing to understand about perceptual channels is this. The information can appear quite subtle, and it can appear quite vividly. But in either case, the experience has the same defining quality. It feels received and not deliberately imagined. Some people don't primarily see information, they feel it. In these cases, the body becomes the interface. And information can show up in physical sensations like pressure or warmth or cold, tension in a specific location, or a bodily certainty that something is wrong. And one of the most documented historical examples of this perception is Edgar Cayce. Cayce had very little formal education and no medical training. But while in a trance-like state, he put himself in such a deep trance that he was known as the sleeping prophet. But while under, he was able to describe very specific physical conditions in people's bodies, often identifying the exact area where a problem was occurring. And what made his case unusual wasn't just that he could locate the illness, but is that he would often go further, describing detailed treatment recommendations and sometimes using medical terminology that he would not have consciously known. Doctors who observed some of these sessions recorded the descriptions because they were surprised by how technically specific the information could be. Now, whether someone interprets that as intuition, altered cognition, or something else entirely is still up for debate. But the pattern itself still consists with what we're calling somatic channeling. The body detects something first, and then the mind attempts to translate it into language. The third category is called symbolic perception, and this is probably the most misunderstood channel. Information doesn't arrive directly. Instead, it appears through symbols, metaphors, dreams, and archetypal imagery. Rather than receiving a clear statement, the mind receives something more like a puzzle. It could be a dream that seems unusually vivid, or a symbol that repeats across different situations, or a metaphor that seems to carry meaning deeper than the surface. And because of that, symbolic perception often requires interpretation first before it can be useful information. A well-known historical woman associated with this type of symbolic and philosophical perception is Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Such a cool name. Blavatsky wrote extensively on mystical philosophy and symbolic cosmology in works such as The Secret Doctrine. What made her particularly effective at working with symbolic material wasn't just that she reported receiving symbolic insights. It was that she spent years studying symbolic systems across many cultures. She immersed herself in comparative religion, ancient mythological archetypes, Eastern philosophical traditions, and Western Hermetic symbolism. Because of that background, she had a large symbolic vocabulary to draw from. When symbolic imagery appeared, she already had a framework that helped her interpret it. And that's an important point for understanding the channel. Basically, if you are a receiver of symbolic perception, you really need to get nerdy about it. I mean, you've got to get really nerdy about it to be reliable. Symbolic perception itself is only half the process. The other half is symbolic literacy, the ability to recognize patterns, mythological themes, and archetypes across cultures. Without that foundation, the mind will often fill in the meaning with personal beliefs or assumptions instead. Symbolic perception can be extremely powerful, but it can also be the channel most vulnerable to interpretation. That's because symbols never arrive with instructions. They always require translation. And translation is where people can easily project their own faiths and stories into the symbol. The final category is something often that gets mislabeled as prophecy. It is better understood as temporal pattern recognition. Some people are extremely sensitive to patterns across time. They track cycles, behaviors, and trends almost automatically. And when they say something will likely happen, they're not seeing the future. They're recognizing momentum, noticing where current events are pointing. Commonly, this type of perception is called precognition, but in many cases, it's simply a heightened ability to recognize trajectories and probabilities. The mind is tracking patterns that other people haven't noticed yet. Figures who study complex systems, from psychologists like Carl Jung to modern risk analysis like Nassim Taleb, have shown that patterns repeat across time. When someone is unusually sensitive to those patterns, their observations can look like prophecy. In reality, they're simply recognizing momentum before the rest of the crowd sees it. A related but more advanced type of temporal perception goes beyond tracking momentum. Some individuals are able to direct which future trajectories carry the most positive and negative potential, the high and low vibration outcomes of unfolding events. Historical and contemporary observers sometimes call this probabilistic precognition or future-oriented intuition. These high-sensitivity probabilistic perceivers may not see literal images, but they can sense or know the likely outcome across multiple possible timelines. A subset reportedly uses a mind's eye visualization, perceiving the branches of potential futures along a spectrum of vibrational quality. In other words, this type of perception isn't about foretelling a fixed future, because there isn't any. It's about weighing the probabilities and sensing momentum toward outcomes, particularly those that carry the most positive or negative potential. Like classic temporal pattern recognition, it's a skill, a subtle attunement towards events and how they unfold, and how choices influence trajectories over time. For most people, they don't have only one channel. They have one dominant channel and a few weaker ones. But problems arise when they try to interpret their perceptions using the wrong framework. For example, a symbolic receiver might try to interpret dreams literally, or a somatic receiver may misinterpret their bodily sensations for emotions. So understanding the channel is what allows perception to become clear. Before we go any further, just do something real simple. Think about the last time that you knew something before it happened without any explanation. Now think about how that information arrived. Not what it meant, but just how it arrived. Did it show up as an image or a scene in your mind? If so, then your perception may lean towards perceptual channels, also known as clairvoyance. If it showed up through your body, a pressure or sensation, then that is a somatic channel. also known as clairsentience. But maybe nothing appeared visually or physically at all. You just knew something, no explanation. That points towards cognitive intuitive perception. And some of you may notice stuff through dreams, symbols, metaphors. If any of these descriptions stood out to you immediately, then you may have just identified your own predominant perceptual channel. And understanding that channel is the first step towards learning how to refine it. Because perception alone is not the goal. Discernment is. There's my favorite word again. Receiving information is only the first step, but understanding whether that information is accurate, symbolic, incomplete, or misinterpreted, that is the real assignment. Perception without discernment just creates confusion. This discernment turns perception into reality. In the next episode, I want to go deeper into something practical, how each one of these channels can be refined and strengthened. More importantly, how can you tell if what you're experiencing is actually improving or if you're adding your own noise? Because learning to recognize the difference is what separates curiosity from real understanding. I hope to see you all next time. Till then, stay weird, stay sovereign, stay curious.